Welcome to the Music for the Soul podcast, where we talk honestly about difficult things. This is a place where music, hope, and healing come together. I'm Becky Nordquist.
And I'm Steve Seiler. Today we are going to be talking about a very difficult issue, so I want to caution before we begin that this is not really a program for little ears. So please, listeners, take the appropriate steps to keep this between the adults in the room. I also want to, before we begin the interview, give you an address to go to receive a free download from this program. It will be musicforthesoul.org/need Devo. That's NEEDDEVO. What we're going to be talking about today is suicidal ideation. And our guest today is none other than my co-host, Becky Nordquist. Becky, thank you so much for being willing to go to this difficult place to bring hope and healing to our listeners.
I'm grateful for God's healing, and I'm grateful to share that it is possible with anyone who needs it.
Let me say a little bit about the download that's going to be available before we start. We want to be responsible in the things that we offer, and because the song Need You Now could be triggering for listeners who are struggling with suicidal ideation, we are releasing it only in the context of a video, which will also contain an introductory devotion and information on where to get help. This song will not be available on the streaming services. We don't want anybody to come upon it accidentally without being prepared for what it is about. So again, this is going to be available only in a video context, and the address that I gave you earlier in the program and that I'll repeat again later is going to be initially the only place that you will be able to hear the song. And it will also come with, as I said, a devotional. So now that we've taken care of sharing that information, Becky, will you tell our listeners what precipitated your descent into suicidal ideation?
Oh, the perfect storm, right? I mean, how often do we have the luxury of just having one event in life hit us? For me, it was years and years of child sexual abuse and secrets, and then emotional, relational abuse, some physical abuse. There was just a lot of trauma that had compounded itself. And then not long after I had my fourth child, I was finding myself home alone a lot, raising kids. And I was very young. Oh boy, by the time the fourth child was born, I think it was 21. And I started to not be able to keep all of my plates spinning because while I was going through all those things, I was trying to look normal. I just wanted to be normal. I just wanted people to see that I loved the Lord, because I did. I was leading worship and I loved singing. I loved Jesus. I didn't understand why he'd allowed so much in my life, but I just knew that I needed him on some level, even though I was furious with him at the same time. I know that sounds really strange, but I did. I was dedicated to the Lord, and yet I was really angry. And there were even parts of me that almost hated God because I didn't get why he allowed what he did. And I had a lot of questions, scary questions that my upbringing taught me that I couldn't ask him. And I definitely shouldn't entertain the idea. So I was at this inward wrestling. Pretty soon it all became just too much. And I couldn't keep up the facade. I couldn't keep all the plates spinning with 4 kids in under 5 years. I didn't really have family around. So it wasn't dropping your kids off at your mom's for an hour for a break. It was very much, really all I had was my church family. They were the ones that stepped up and did what they could, but everybody has life. And I was young. I'd been a teenage pregnancy. There was just so much that I was carrying really alone. And my knowledge of God was limited. I mean, I knew all the stories, I knew all the songs. I'd grown up in the church, but I was very confused about the church because a big portion of my abuse happened in the church, and it was covered for the sake of that church. So just a lot of confusion, which we know the enemy is a master of orchestrating. And my concept of God was horrifically altered from the time I accepted Jesus as a little girl. fell madly in love with the Lord, who I thought he was. I ended up sitting back and saying, I'm not sure that's really who you ever were, or if you ever really truly loved me, God. And then my concept of self was, we all have those wounds that reinforce the lies of our unworthiness. I'm not worth the fight, or I'm unlovable, or I'm unlikable, or I'll never be good enough. Life has a way, and the enemy has a way of reinforcing all those things, lies about ourselves and lies about God. So it ended up coming to a crashing halt. I was going through some therapy. I think we've talked on other programs about a little bit about my abuse and how I was not allowed to get help. But I promised myself at 16 that one day when I was an adult, I would get the help I needed. So I started that journey in my early 20s. And I was afraid to start crying because I remember telling my therapist that I pretty much figured that I wouldn't be able to stop. So there was some fear involved. But as things unfolded, it hit a peak when I literally felt like my limbs were about 1,000 pounds each. And I literally physically could not get out of bed anymore. I couldn't even lift my head off the pillow. My faith felt very broken, and I blamed myself because if I had adequate faith, I could will myself to be better, or if I had faith that was strong enough, or if I really believed God, that I could just pull myself out of it. And I couldn't. And definitely, I know now that there weren't just emotional things going on and the trauma and abuse things going on, but there was very much a physical aspect going on and a scientific aspect going on. But often in the Christian realm, they are afraid to acknowledge the fact that hormones and chemicals with your brain, everything plays a part. We are created in the image of a Trinity God, so a three-part God. So, of course, we're also created in three parts too, and they have to have balance. But yeah, it came to a crashing halt. And my therapist said, you can either check yourself in or I can check you in, because I was having not just thoughts of suicide. I had a plan and I was beginning to have ways to carry it out. And ironically, the greatest fear I had was that my kids would find me, because I didn't want to damage them by them finding me dead. So that sounds really bizarre, because the person who's not in that place says, well, if you commit suicide, they're going to be damaged, whether they find you or not. But in my mind at the time, I felt that everyone would be better off if I wasn't here. And so that's how I kind of brought logic to the situation, was if I could figure out a way where I could be alone in the car and let go of the wheel and hit, an embankment. I mean, I had all these ideas and I wrote them down in a journal. I did end up in a mental health hospital twice, back to back. And ultimately, it was there that I found the Lord, really found the Lord, experienced Him. I had nothing left to give. I had no hope. Yeah.
Something that you touched on, you always hear, we had no idea. And that's because people are so good at keeping the facade, at keeping the external looking good. And you spoke about that a couple of times. There was a man at a company that I worked at when I was in my 20s, and I had spoken to him just the day before. How are you doing? Everything's fine. And the next morning, I learned that he that evening had taken his life. And so clearly, people are able to kind of break themselves apart and present one reality to the world that is completely inconsistent with what they're carrying inside. So, knowing that, I guess one of my questions would be, how might those around you have noticed what you were going through, and what are some of the signs that loved ones might be looking for? I know we can't name them all because these are unique situations, but are there some things that you think that people should be particularly aware of if they're concerned about loved ones and this kind of outcome?
Well, I think a lot of times we learn how to become great pretenders, especially in our society. You look at our social media situation where,
Yes.
I call it the highlight reel. Nobody sees the dark, dirty. And then it's almost like you're ashamed if you overshare on social media about the negative parts of your life. So what does that do? Well, it isolates the person who's going through serious struggles. And I get not wanting to air all your dirty laundry, but you do need to have at least one or two close people. Now, certainly, my husband was very aware. My husband at the time, it wasn't Dave, it was my first husband, but he was very aware at the time that things were not well with me. Things like I'd give up on stuff. There was no plan for the future for my life. You know, they talk about you give things away. It's like you're prepping to be gone. But I think any change that you notice, it's important to make sure that if you can't be the one that your loved one goes to, that you help them recognize people that they can go to. It's such a shameful place, especially within the Christian community, to admit that I can't see the sun shining even when it is.
Yes.
Because, you know, the joy of the Lord is your strength. And there's all those
Cliches.
beautiful truths of the Bible, really,
but also they're cliches.
They're cliche. And it's not really the Bible in context or entirety.
Right.
Go to the Psalms. How many Psalms are songs of lament? And lament is good. Lament is holy. Sorrow, grieving, even anger, those are emotions that God designed.
Amen.
And he grows us closer to him and allows us to experience him through those emotions so they're not bad or make you less of a believer. I don't know, in all honesty, because each situation is so very different. But I think if your gut tells you that something's off with someone, you need to listen to it. Don't brush it off. Don't say, oh, they're fine. I think a lot of times people don't want to see what they don't want to see. They don't want to admit that someone is at the end of their rope. They don't want to see that, or they don't have time for that. Or I grow weary of all these posts that are like, reach out if you're feeling this way. Yes, I agree. Reach out, but you also have to reach out to them, because I did not want to reach out
when they can't. Right. And
right.
I think
I had literally no strength, strength to reach out.
I think the other thing that happens is that people think, oh, well, that's not my place. I don't want to, stick my nose in where it doesn't belong. But again, that's another reason why you might ignore a feeling that you get that, ooh, something's not right there.
Right. And I have some good examples of reaching out of people in my life. I had two wonderful women who they didn't say a word about what I was going through. They knew something was up, but they didn't know what. So they reached out to me and they said, hey, you know what? We're going to start praying for our families. Would you want to join our little prayer group? So I said yes. And ultimately, I received another level of healing through those women, because that's how they reached out to me and helped me not feel alone. And they would share their struggles, and we would pray for our families and our family struggles. And it was a safe place. And it didn't have anything to do with what I'd been through or any trauma. It was about my current state, which was very helpful, because when you've been through trauma and you're processing, you tend to live in the past, or you tend to live in the future, because it's just hard to be present. So that was one way that people reached out to me instead of me reaching out to them. It's about noticing where people are, which is not easy.
Well, I hear you talking about this idea of isolation and about somebody feeling all alone. I think clearly for younger people, for everybody, but particularly for younger people, for teens, acceptance is such an important thing. Peer approval, peer pressure. I mean, why do we have young people joining gangs? So they can feel accepted and have people who know their story and who they can hang with. So I think definitely this idea that it's when we get separated out from the pack, so to speak, and off to one side by ourselves, that we can ingest these lies and believe them. It's like a loop, and it turns in on itself, and there can feel like no way out. And I think that's where the inability to reach out comes from, is there's this just entire dark circle that begins. And once you're in that pool, it's very hard to pull yourself out.
Absolutely. The other thing is, I think back to those times, and often when I've been most depressed is when I'm on that merry-go-round of it's never going to get better. Things will never change. And for me, it was like, oh my goodness, it was wave after wave of trauma. So for some people, it's kind of like, is my luck ever going to turn? And it's often people would make jokes about, oh, the voices tell you that. And I remember one time I was in high school and I'm going, not everybody hears voices, because I heard voices from the time I was like 4 or 5 years old.
Mm.
I mean, it was my way of coping. And when I was little, they were my friends. I mean, they were my friends. And then as I got older, they turned and they became very much against me living and against me being worth the breath I was breathing. But we tend to, and if we look at the scriptural reference of Eve, I mean, look at the deception that occurred. She wasn't with Adam. The enemy has her alone in the garden.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
God was not walking there. I mean, and not that God didn't see, he knew what was going on and everything, but Adam wasn't there. So when you're isolated and you're led to believe that you're the only one that's ever faced this or the only one that's going through these ideas or thoughts, and you believe all those lies about yourself, and you can get into almost a habitual cycle of riding that train, and it's very difficult to get off of that merry-go-round, or not so merry-go-round as I say.
Yeah.
But yeah, isolation's huge. And you do want, I mean, that's one of our core needs is to be accepted and approved, loved, having worth, value, identity, security, adequacy, and ability to be heard, to be understood, and to belong. Those are things that we were created to have.
One of the things that you said was how people can feel like it's never going to change, that their just luck continues to be bad. One of the things that has always struck me about suicide is that it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Yes.
And how do you think we can get especially young people to know that things are going to change? What are some kind of examples that we could use to break through and let them know the way you're feeling when you're 13? Forget that you're not going to feel that way at 14 or 20 or 30. Yeah, I mean, there's so much. In fact, I can even remember an example. I remember I was working at the Industry Hill Sheraton as a DJ, and somebody requested a Toto song. And I pulled Toto's greatest hits out of my rack, and because I'd gone to high school with those guys. And I thought, I didn't make it. I didn't have a music career. Okay, well, I'm still alive, so I guess it's okay. Fade out, fade in. 3 or 4 years later, I'm sitting in my driveway in Nashville, listening to my first song on Christian radio and going, wait a minute, I did make it. I did get to do it. The difference between those two moments is just staggering. And that was in a short span, 3 or 4 years. So how do we convey that kind of open-endedness to young people or to people who of any age who are trapped and who feel like, not for me, it could never happen for me?
Wow, that's a tough question to answer. So I just, I have to kind of go back to where I was. I was 11 when I had my first thought of suicide ideation. It wasn't the first time I felt like I wanted to die. It was the first time I actually thought about how I would do it. I was starting to have memories. It's very difficult when you're young because you don't have the experience of time. But soon you come to realize that how you felt 2 hours ago is not how you're going to feel in 2 hours. Otherwise, you always have reprieve in life. It's a very hard concept to grasp because your world is very, very small, and yet you feel it's so very, very big. And that I'm not really sure. The only thing I can think of is having good examples if they're talking about it. But see, that's the thing. Our world runs so fast that most people in America were double incomes. We got parents that are both working and checked out a lot of single parent homes. Is there time for the conversations to have with our kids, our teenagers? I felt very much, I have older kids and younger kids, and I very much felt like my older kids needed me more than my younger kids did. Just
Mm.
because they were legally able to be at home by themselves, it didn't make it the right timing. Because as my children, when I started teaching private lessons at home, that's what I did for a while. And they were in the junior high age and stuff. They would spend hours sitting on my bed and we would talk. And you learn how your children process, and you have the opportunity to converse with them about the fact that how you feel now is not how you're going to feel tomorrow. You know, if you need to cry something out, let's set a timer for 15 minutes and just cry, beat your pillow, get it all out. And don't stop until that 15 minutes is done. I guarantee that when that 15 minutes is done, you're going to feel a little bit better. And then you need to come up with a plan on if there's an action that you need to take because of what has happened to you. And that's, I think, giving your kids the tools is imperative. And it can start very young on how to manage hurt, grieving, anger, frustration, and being a listening mentor or parent. And because some kids, they don't have a choice, but you can be a mentor. You just have to have the ears and awareness. But it's so hard for us to see past our own noses sometimes that we miss the people. We can say we care all we want, but how well are we really looking at our neighbor? Our
Mhm.
neighbor isn't a geographical thing. Our
Mhm.
our neighbor is the person right in front of us.
Yes.
It's the people that we see at church. How well do you see the person sitting down the row from you? You know, we had an incident one time that one of our pastors was preaching and he's like, I am really sensing that there is someone in this meeting right now that was planning to go home and commit suicide. And he said, do not leave this place. Do not leave this place without talking with us. And it was like a week later, there was a young man who was planning that very thing. But you have to have an awareness that people are going through a lot and they need other people. And in kids especially, they don't feel heard, they don't feel seen. Parents are so busy and money is tight and life is busy. There's a lot of stressors and they're learning. When you think about how little time our kids have with us, they're learning how to navigate in a really difficult world, more than what I feel like I had even. And some of these kids have trauma. And some of these kids feel like they have no place, no purpose. There's just a lot of really hard things about growing up. And if you've got trauma to juggle on top of it, it's tough. So we need to be aware and awake and good listeners and give them tools.
The three words that just jumped out to me were time for conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing in a quote unquote healthy family where parents are present and inclined to listen to their kids, or at least want to try to listen to their kids. But I think of so many kids who are latchkey and who don't have anybody to listen and have all this screen time to hear messages that nobody needs to hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not only are they not being heard, they're having negative messages poured into them,
Mm-hmm.
or the culture's messages poured into them. So I guess the question is, from a church perspective, how do we make sure that we're offering opportunities and time for conversation with our youth?
Absolutely. I think too, with churches, it's great to have all these great youth trips. They're wonderful. And they definitely can be a catalyst for good conversation. But preparing and training your leadership is crucial. At the time of my divorce, I had no awareness because I was drowning in my own stuff that I could not see past my own pain into the lives of my daughters who were like junior and senior in high school. And so when we were left, it was years later, I found out both of them at two different times went to their youth pastor and told him straight out that they were suicidal.
Oh my gosh.
And he did absolutely nothing. Nothing. He did nothing. He didn't even tell me. And I'm sorry, I probably sound a little furious right now, but I am.
Well, he would have been, in his own mind, respecting their confidences, but erring in doing so, obviously.
You are an obligated reporter, or I'm
Yeah.
sorry, mandated reporter. When you are in those positions, you need to follow through. If you don't want to talk to the parents, you need to get the child the help that they need, whether it is referring them to a mental health coach. There are mental health coaches. I'm actually a certified mental health coach now. that can help your child be assessed.
Mhm.
And then you give them options on how they want to proceed, because they have to proceed. You have to determine, is it you're in so much pain you want to die, or have you thought about the ways you're going to die? Do you have a way to carry out? Where are you on that scale? How can we best help you walk through this horrible time in your life? Your entire world has been rocked. How can we be there and walk with you? Because again, we're in this situation. We're talking about the ministry of presence and the ministry of mercy. I mean, you have to be present. We were created for community. And so the most dangerous thing is when you see a person that's isolated, that has no friends and no connectivity. And as we were talking earlier, how can you determine in someone's life that they're in danger and in a dangerous place? Are they alone? Do they have one friend? They don't need 10 if they just have one that they talk to. If it's a good influence, that's the other part, is you have to make sure that they're going to point them towards good things. And, I have to say with parents, especially within the Christian community, so often, I don't know about you, but I was brought up in a family where you do what I say. There isn't a conversation to be had here. It's right, wrong, black, white. And we're not going to walk you through the decision-making process or give you the tools to discern for yourself the outcome of a decision.
I laugh because my dad used to say, end of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not
And,
done.
right. And your kids need to process. One thing I never wanted to do with my kids was just say no for the sake of saying no. I have reasons that I say no to things.
Mm-hmm.
You may not agree with them, but I want you to understand them. We have to have the ability to just not shut our kids down when they want something or something's really important to them. It may not seem important to us, but for them, it's the world.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you allow them to do immoral or unethical things or you reward poor behavior or anything, but you can talk it through and face the problem shoulder to shoulder instead of becoming the enemy in the situation. I mean, I believe that if my parents had come shoulder to shoulder with everything I was walking through, I may have had a completely different view on my entire life.
Sure.
You need help. You're saying you need help. You're threatening suicide. You're attempting suicide. Wow, that's some heavy stuff. What do we need to help you feel safe? What do we need to help you feel nurtured and loved and protected? Because that's where our kids are. They need those things. And those young people, they need to know that they're not alone, that their parents aren't so wrapped in their careers and their next cruise or whatever it is, that they're important people and they have worth and value.
Yeah.
And they're worth fighting for.
Well said. Maybe now it's time to turn to the song that you wrote. Could you tell us? You mentioned journaling. How did you come to write "Need You Now" and the timing of it? Why did you write "Need You Now" at this juncture in your life?
Certainly, a lot of our work entails all the things that led up to this, really a turning point in my life. The projects that we work on with Innocent Child, that was a huge, huge project, that song in and of itself. And then just all the stories and the things that are going with it, it causes reflection in me. And it was one day I was looking through some old journals. I'm in this crazy thing of going through all my files and organizing. And before I have to write things like a devotional and things like that, I have to get myself organized. I know it sounds crazy, but the creative brain does have to have space. So I was creating space and I was looking through some journals and I stumbled along some, and someone that's dear to me was really struggling with suicide ideation. I was chatting with them, and then another person came up and they were struggling with it and invasive thoughts and things like that. And I just took a step back and remembered, because whenever you talk with someone who's in that place, it's important that you don't speak to them necessarily from where you are now, but remember where you were then. Because when you're delivered, it's very easy to jump into, it's going to be fine. You're going to be fine. You're going to get healed. It's very easy to kind of brush off their pain. And so, much like you do when you have to write about something, you put on that coat. You've talked about that in other podcasts of wearing your coat of pain that other people have been through. It's like that for me. I have to put that old jacket back on for a minute and really ask the Lord, what do you want to bring them through my vessel? So I was looking through those journals and I was reminded of the night in the mental hospital where I was in the corner on the floor, curled up, and the moon was just shining into the windows. And my Bible was sitting on the desk there in the room. And I had reached a point where I wasn't sure God even existed anymore. And if he did, I wasn't even sure I wanted anything to do with him. I was so furious with him. And I reached up and I grabbed my Bible. I'm like, if you're real and if you're really there, if you care at all about me, I need you to speak right now. I need to hear from you right now. I need you now. And I never, ever just let my Bible fall open because with my luck, it'll fall open to Leviticus or something or the begats, and I'm like, I just let it fall open. And it actually fell open to Psalm 88. Which years later, I wouldn't know until years later after God had healed so much in me that it's actually known to be the Black Psalm. It is the darkest of the laments. And yet the psalmist still declares God sovereign. It's about being in the lowest of places and feeling like God's just forsaken. And I just sat there and I heard, I see you. I see your tears. I see you. And it still brings tears to my eyes because it was that moment in that experience that I knew that I'd cried out to God and he heard my cry. And I just needed evidence that he was present, that he cared enough to see me. So as I went through the journals that day, I remembered all of the ideas that I had that I could take control over my situation and just be done because I was exhausted and I was tired in that time. And I did not see a way out. I didn't want to live with the life sentence of being a chronically abused and assaulted woman. I didn't want to carry that with me anymore. And then I remembered that my God met me in that moment when I cried out and needed him most. He met me and he said, you don't have to carry that. I'm going to carry that for you. In fact, I've already carried that for you. And I carried it all the way to the cross. And you can have new life in me, and you can have hope, and you can have freedom, and you can have healing that seems impossible. One of the things I struggled with was feeling innocent. I never, ever felt innocent. And I was brokenhearted over that. But even that, God chose to restore that to me. And it was an incredible gift.
Becky, I hope that if there's somebody listening who's been in this dark place, that they heard your last several words as a prayer for them. Because I know that's your heart. That those who are feeling alone, who feel unseen, unheard, unworthy, not innocent, would know that they are beautiful, they are a child of God, that God cares, and that there are people like you who do care, and that there is hope. So you didn't say that as a prayer, you said that as your story, but I had an amen to that because it's beautiful. And to see what God has done in your life, it astounds me to think that someone with your gifts, and they are many, would have ever believed that they were unworthy. You are a bright and shining light in the lives of so many. So I think your very life and the way you've lived it gives the lie to that the enemy would have us believe that we're not worthy and that we have nothing to give. It's just not true.
I'm very aware that we probably have listeners who either don't believe in God or are so furious with him. I mean, I flipped God off, I'll be honest. When I was at the height of my anger, I was ready to walk and didn't believe he existed. But the truth is when you've been created in his image, it doesn't matter if you believe in him or believe him, because you have an enemy. You have an enemy who wants you ultimately dead. He really does. That's what he wants, to shut your light out. He wants to say that you don't matter. He wants you to think that you're filthy, you're worthless, you aren't worth the air you breathe. All those things. Those are all lies that I believed, things that I could not get out of my head. They would invasively come into my mind. And so he comes after us.
Mm-hmm.
And whether we believe or not, it doesn't matter because you're in the image of God. And so seeing that is really, really important, an important concept. Losing your purposes. I mean, I keep hearing people that are more middle-aged that are struggling with ideation. And we talked about the young kids, but I have a group of friends that they're going, okay, well, even at church, I don't have any purpose anymore. What am I going to do with my life? My kids are gone. The church doesn't want me. I have nothing to give anymore. But God has purposes as long as you have air and breath, and you don't have to be some singer, superstar person. You've got purpose with your vessel everywhere you go.
Yes.
It's the greatest ministries are the ones that are quiet, that nobody
Becky,
sees.
I actually, one time I was at that point of weariness, felt like it was one of those times where I was writing 2 songs a day, 5 days a week, and I was just spent. And I had a writing appointment at night, so it was going to be 3 songs that day. And I thought, what am I going to write about tonight? I have nothing to give. And as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I heard, that's what he wants. When you've got nothing to give, that's what he wants. He wants you to give that. So it's endless. You can never reach the nothing point where God is concerned. As long as you have breath, there's a next step. Or as my friend Lisa says, and a bonus. every time we wake up, it's a bonus day, right? Well,
there's always a purpose and a plan for the day.
Right. I can imagine some people who have been listening and thinking, well, this is all very interesting, but it's not about me. And that's why I want you to tell, because I know this story, but I want you to tell the response you received the very first time that you played this song, which I know was at a songwriting intensive retreat. Can you share the response and what happened when you played this song for a general audience who had no idea what was coming?
Well, I was there to talk about songwriting through your pain. And you want to talk about some intimidation. When you're on a panel with like Michael W. Smith, Gloria Gaither, Natalie Grant, you're kind of like, the last thing I want to do is bring my chop shop to the piano, but it was, she wanted a work in progress. And it was about that time that this was a work in progress. And, it's always scary because if you're a songwriter, you know that when you write something, it is your baby. And so, especially when something comes from such a deep, intimate, dark, broken place, it's really scary. Nevertheless, the Lord had really pressed on me that people needed to hear what I did have. So it was interesting as I walked by Michael W. Smith to get to the piano. I was afraid I was going to throw up. I just was like, Lord, you know what? At this point, it's yours. So played it, just the part of it. And after I got up, it was just silent. And Gloria said, how many of you have felt that way at some point in your life? And I would dare say that probably 98% of the audience raised their hand. And everyone on that panel had raised their hand. So when you think that you're alone, you're not. When 98% of an audience who are professing believers, this was a Christian songwriting intensive, when that high of a percentage of the room has their hand in the air saying, I have thought about suicide ideation, that will tell you that you're not alone in thinking these things. You're not alone for feeling like I'm at the end, I can't do anymore. But like you said earlier, Steve, it's when we're at the end that he does his greatest work. That's absolutely true. That's what he means when he says, in your weakness, I am strong. It's learning that we don't live in our own strength because we can't. We weren't created for any of the stuff, like any of the things that I've gone through in my life. That wasn't God's plan for my life. He didn't create me to be able to carry a life sentence that I didn't choose. He didn't create me to carry the loss of loved ones, the loss of babies, the loss of my home, the loss of everything material. He didn't create me to carry those things. He said, no. It's okay. It's all broken here, but I'm here. I'm here to carry it for you. I'm here to carry it with you. I'm here. I am is here. And he has proven himself faithful over and over and over. But we have to give him the opportunity to do so and hand over the reins of all the pain and all the broken and all the deception and all the lies and say, God, I need your truth because my truth is warped and screwed up. And I'm telling you, once you hand over the reins, the healing, the possibility that's there for healing and hope and a future that is full and beyond what you could have ever ask or imagine or think, that's when that incredible, out of this world power comes and it rushes in to meet you. And it will. And it's not loud and obnoxious. It's very quiet and still because that's how he moves, right? And sometimes we have big things happen, but the best experiences have always been where he's been quiet and still and moved in my life in ways that make the earth quake. It's awesome.
Becky, thank you so much for being willing to plow this ground today, to re-plow this ground, relive this, that some of our listeners hopefully might be encouraged. We usually play a portion of the song on the Music for the Soul podcast, whatever song we're talking about. We're not going to do that today. We want you instead to go to musicforthesoul.org/need Devo. That's NEEDDEVO. There you will have a chance to hear the song, see a lyric music video, an introductory devotion, and receive information on where to get help if you are struggling with thoughts of suicide. I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today for this important conversation. Please consider sharing it with a friend, especially if you feel like there might be a friend or some family that you know that has the potential for this in their lives. And please visit our website, musicforthesoul.org, where you can stream or download every song in our catalog. If you have already experienced a suicide in your family or someone you love has, we have a project called Chaos of the Heart for those grieving the loss of a loved one to suicide. And that is available at our website. So we thank you again for listening. God bless.